Hi everyone and welcome to the Latte Lounge. We're continuing tonight with the third in the series of our Let's Get Intimate month of weekly live events. We'll be talking about sex, love, health and relationships in midlife, menopause and beyond. But tonight focusing much more on navigating relationships new and old and how to improve our communication skills with advice from husband and wife psychotherapist team, Caron and Glenn Baru. We'll be here for around half an hour and we'll be taking any questions that may come in at the end. As ever, we are really grateful to be bringing you these live events in partnership with Silk Natural Lubricant. Silk, as many of you know, is for vaginal dryness, which affects most women at some stage in their lives, especially around menopause when hormones fluctuate. Using a natural lubricant like Silk Intimate to hydrate and soothe can make all the difference. It's a plant and water-based pH-friendly lubricant that soothes dryness, itching and soreness, and it's recommended by health professionals and it's NHS approved. Silk is offering all our Latte Lounge followers and members an exclusive 30% off during February. Simply head to silk.co.uk and use code LL30 at the checkout. And this is not to be used in conjunction with any other offer, and it ends midnight on the 28th of February. So I'd like to welcome my guests tonight, Caron and Glenn Baru. Hi guys.
Hi Katie, thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you so much, both of you, for coming in. Before we chat, I thought I'd give everyone a little bit of background information about you both, if that's okay. So Caron is a registered dietitian and a qualified psychotherapist, and Glenn has a PhD in behavioural psychology and specialises in male issues in both corporate and private practice settings. Now, together and individually, they specialise in relationship therapy, be that couples, individuals, parenting, co-parenting, siblings, work issues, marriage, divorce or separation, always focusing on the many issues ranging from intimacy, stress, anger management, and they give their clients the tools they need to change the way they listen and hear and communicate with each other to help them move through crisis and establish better relationships. So guys, the last couple of weeks, you may know that we've been talking a lot about sex in midlife and how it can often be uncomfortable or painful. And many women tell us that they lose their libido altogether due to menopause or other midlife issues. And in these two series before tonight, we've obviously been looking at the medical reasons behind this. We've looked at treatment options and various tips to make sex more comfortable and pleasurable. But tonight I wanted to talk to you guys more about the relationships as a whole and how we should be talking to each other, because sex is one of many parts that can hopefully make but not break a relationship. So what advice would you give women who are watching, perhaps who've suffered from painful sex or they're too embarrassed to talk to their partners about why they might not want to have sex anymore?
So we've been working together now for 25 years and doing couples therapy together. So the great thing about that is we often hear about the men having the same issues as well. And one of the things that's very dominant in couples therapy is there tends to be a lack of openness and communication between couples. And it's not just about sex, but I'm just going to address the sex part and you just butt in whenever you want to.
Right.
But what we see is that sex becomes an issue that people don't want to talk about because it feels so personal. And it not only feels personal to the woman, but it also feels personal to the man, because does she not want me? Does he not want me? It becomes an ego and a much deeper core thing between the couple than just we're not having sex. Mm-hmm. And often in trying to address sex, because I was trained in the States and you have to choose a subspecialty, and my subspecialty, because I knew I wanted to work with families and couples, was becoming a sex therapist. So one of the things that's very prevalent often in couples, and especially couples in crisis, where anything in the couple is a crisis, is there is a shying away of discussing sex that then becomes an issue in the couple, because everything then feels like a bigger issue, because both parties are feeling rejected, unwanted, unloved. And people are often very worried about talking about their needs, what pain or not pain they're having, what's changed for them, because they embarrassed, uncomfortable, self-conscious, whatever it is within the couple, which is what we see all the time, that sometimes we literally have to pry out of the couple what's happening in their sex lives, and especially for women after childbearing years, when they feel their bodies have started to change or are changing, or women become quite self-conscious about what they look like. You know, it's very hard for them to express to their partner what they're really feeling. And that for us often indicates the difficulty in the couple with communication on all issues.
You see, what's really important to understand, whether it be sex, whether it be communication, whether it be the relationship, whether it be about children, it's not really about any of those issues in particular. It's really about the couple and how it is that they deal with it and how they handle it and what the relationship is about. So it's really important to understand is intimacy, I kind of put in two categories. Intimacy is either vertical or it's horizontal. So vertical intimacy is very much about how you communicate, how you talk to each other, how it is that you build that closeness and that trust and that respect and that space only for the couple. And unless that vertical intimacy is there, the horizontal intimacy is not going to be where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Because you've got to be able to build that on an emotional level. Yes, men see sex as more of a physical thing, where women see more about it as an emotional thing. But that's okay. We can see it differently, but still meet. But unless we have that ability to meet emotionally on a vertical level and recognize how to really understand each other about what each other needs on a daily basis, sometimes sex is a bridge too far. But it's also about recognizing that when you do that, it's also about recognizing when there is no sex, or sex is, so we say, waning. It doesn't say anything about the sex in particular. It talks about the couple. It talks about in terms of how close we are, how we've lost each other, how it is that somehow or other we've learned to take each other for granted. Other things got in the way. We stopped looking for each other. So unless you have that ability to have that real vertical intimacy, the horizontal is not going to happen the way that it really needs to be. So one does follow the other.
And we just also have to add, because although I know this is the Latte Lounge about women and menopause, men's libidos and sexuality also does change. And there's been, as far as I'm concerned, there's not been enough research about it. And because I'm so fortunate to work with Glenn, with men and women, we get to hear what is happening for men as well, which then influences the woman.
Well,
because if a man is really struggling with his libido and his body's changed, and you know he's having any kind of erectile issues or whatever conditions there are, often, and this was a really interesting study that came out like very recently, Viagra does not work if the emotional side of the couple is not working. So we have lots of couples who, the woman will discuss, her pain and not having sex or what's happening. And then they'll think that the answer, well, pre-COVID, is to book a weekend away and he'll take Viagra and everything's going to be fine. And then they're shocked that when they get there and he takes the Viagra, nothing happens.
See, what's important.
Which then ties, see, we're just a regular couple at the end of the day.
It's good to see that you guys are
we're just a normal, healthy couple.
Exactly.
So what that then does is, and we've seen this a lot, so the woman, decides that she's done a little bit of discussion or research about lubricants and finding out what's painful for her now during sex, and has maybe gone to a doctor and had some hormonal checks, whereas he's done nothing except get some Viagra. So she's put all this work and energy into what's going to improve the sex life of the couple, and now the Viagra is not working. So now you've created a problem on a problem. And because couples feel uncomfortable then, because they don't know what to do next. And I can't tell you how many couples we talk about that the woman's gone down the road of hormonal checking, vaginal dryness, lubricants, maybe a toy, or doing 5 different things to try and increase the sex drive, the sex life. And he's gone to a doctor, a GP, got some Viagra, and think everything's going to be fine.
Hold on. Let's just talk about male menopause.
And of course, we're generalizing here. Okay, right. Like we're just giving you the general feel of what we see in our practice. We know we're not specific about, everything, because we don't have the time. I mean, we could spend 10 hours talking to you about
and do you think there is actually a male menopause then, Glenn?
There is a male menopause.
I do.
I do believe that there is, because, if I may say, there is hot flashes, there is the stress, there is the sleep issues, there is irritability and all that.
Yeah.
But the thing is that what's important to understand is that it appears as though that it is just like the other kind of menopause when it comes to men. But it's very much about where it's what we call hypogonadism. Hypogonadism is after the age of 30, the testosterone level starts to decrease about 1%. And so what happens here is by the age of 50, that a lot of those things that have occurred has depleted the testosterone. And so what men do, just like women do, they have hormone replacement therapy. They have that testosterone replacement therapy. And so there are times where it's a physical issue and times when it's a medical issue. But it still comes down to the couple.
You see, and that's the problem, that so because it's not spoken about, and because the man's too embarrassed to say that, actually, because if you think about that, right, in the 30s is where most people are childbearing, and they've got young kids. So there's a natural decrease in tiredness. There's an increase in tiredness, natural decrease in sexuality. Then they come out, the kids are starting to leave home. The women are going through menopause or having that decrease. The men are also having a change. And the way it affects the couple then is you've got 2 people who are changing. Everybody's scared to talk about it. They don't really understand what's happening. Up until very recently, menopause wasn't even taught, it's as part of a woman's changing body in a biology curriculum in school, so men are actually even further behind. Eventually I'm hoping everybody will catch up. And it makes it very difficult for a couple who's raised children. There's a gap in the couple in terms of what's happening with, 2 people who now are looking at themselves and going, hang on, where are we now? Our children are thinking of going to uni, leaving home, moving out of home. And I'm looking at this person who we maybe haven't had sex in months or years, which isn't that uncommon, to be honest, in our practice. And now who are we? And so statistically now, the research is showing the greatest separation and divorce is people in their 60s, because they're waking up and realizing that actually I might live another 20 or 30 years now. And am I going to carry on living like this? And then often, luckily, we are very well known for crisis couples. They come storming into our office. And, then of course, we're going to do a sex evaluation. And that's when we're beginning to understand and to see a pattern in couples and the inability to talk through sex. And then, of course, we get into the other issues. Well, then how do you communicate about other things in your life? True. And then we start to see a pattern of communication that isn't happening, that sex is at the end of the line.
Yeah, because we get a lot of women who come to our group with everything from, maybe their husbands or partners, or even those who are single who've had sort of past relationships that haven't gone well, and they've said the male partner is suffering with stress or anxiety and low mood, and the woman and often the men have low sort of self-esteem in terms of body confidence. I mean, how do you break down that communication when a couple come to see you and they start with well, actually I don't want to have sex, and once you've addressed that, if it is a health issue, and hopefully they then get that sorted and go off on their way. But if it's a much deeper issue, how do you actually deal with that? I mean, Glenn, do you find men are less willing to be so open and personal when you see them about this?
Well, I think sometimes being a male can be very toxic. And I think that men, it's very much about intimacy. Research has shown that if there's a problem with why divorce occurs, men don't know how to be good caregivers. And so because of that, and if the woman is having a problem, they get divorced, usually it's because the husband, it's not necessarily about the relationship itself, but the husband is not programmed to be a caregiver. He's more programmed to be the hunter, right? So he's not programmed to be the soft one. So intimacy is part of that. Men are taught to be tough. Men are taught to be, they can handle anything. Men are not taught to be vulnerable. So being toxic is really about what society expects of you instead of what the couple agree on.
And luckily that is changing. You know, the 20s and 30s generation of men, we see a huge shift in that from anyone like, I'd say, 40 and above. They find it even more difficult. But the place we always start with crisis couples is starting at the very beginning of how do you listen to each other? Because that's where it has to start, because most couples talk and they're in their own cycles of talking and they have their own way of talking to each other that's a patterning, even though the patterning isn't coming together and it's not merging.
But the patterning is before they got married.
Correct.
The patterning is from family of origin stuff. Bringing into
so they're bringing their patterning to the marriage. And then, you know, people get married and get distracted because you've got getting married, making money, but getting a house, having children, raising the children, the hecticness of the children. So it's almost like the intense inside of the couple. We call it the parking lot syndrome, where people park their marriages in the parking lot. And then 10, 15 years later, they go to the car and it's rusted and it doesn't start and it falls apart. And then they're surprised, you know, like, what do you mean? Like we've fallen apart. It's like, what do you mean you want a divorce? Like what happened? So we always start, you know, that if we could help them to just unpack what happened and understand that the cycle from their entire lives of how they talk to each other and how they hear each other and the messages that they're hearing and how they trigger each other from the messages is not necessarily what your partner's saying. So the very first thing we do with crisis couples is give them a new vocabulary to talk to each other, so that we have to unpack what it is that's triggering them the most, and then identify the triggers for each other so that they can find a common language to speak to each other in. And in that common language, it's much easier to then start talking about sex. And because a couple who's put each other on hold isn't exactly going to be able to go and start saying what they like sexually, or what they'd like to, how they'd like to be treated in bed, or what's painful now, or what's changed with their bodies. They're not even getting there. So if we give them a new language to speak to each other differently, that's often really, really helpful in them being able to then sit down and say, look, I'm lonely. I miss you. I miss our relationship. I feel like I don't matter anymore. You know, both of them, it's men and women often say that, you know, I'm just irrelevant. I'm just, you know, working all the time to support the family, and I'm so lonely, like, where are you? You know, so it's teaching them a way to really listen, that it's not an attack on you. If she's saying, you know, I need to be hugged, it's not because she's attacking you that you haven't hugged her. It's because that's her need, you know. And once you help people understand that the way they trigger each other doesn't build a relationship, it actually can often separate how two people feel about each other. So our goal, one of our primary goals, is to kind of help find a common language that they can listen to each other and feel heard by each other.
Well, we talk about, where did you learn, maybe we're going too far with this, but Where did you learn about being validated? Where did you learn about what you said was important? Where did you learn about being able to feel that your feelings mattered? Where were you validated growing up or not? And we talk about that family of origin. But the one thing that is really important that I use is basic, it's about relationships, one conversation at a time.
Yeah.
And unless you have that ability to keep that conversation going, it frays away at look for me, search for me. Am I important? Because to men, if you don't respect me, you don't love me. And if for a woman, if you're not looking for me, I don't matter so much to you. But the key is no matter what, all as human beings want to be respected.
Yeah.
But if we feel that respect is being frayed, when it comes to communication, it comes down to, do I feel safe to say it? Do I can say, because it frays, because it's not working, do I have the ability in this relationship to say what's not working for me? And this is where it becomes complacent. This is where it becomes loosens the plot, because people don't feel sometimes they can actually say what they want to say and not be used against them.
Yeah.
People need to feel emotionally safe.
And say you get a couple that do come to you and they're not necessarily at crisis, so they perhaps do feel emotionally safe, but perhaps for whatever reason, that they're not sort of having a sexual relationship. Do men, I don't know if it's a stereotype, but is it a stereotype that men, think about sex all the time, and there's sort of preconceived ideas of what sex should look like based on, old narratives versus, women sort of, like to be loved and held and gentle. And I don't know, we often hear from women who say, oh, well, he wants me, to be how I was in my 20s, but I'm now, I'm a mother and I'm unconfident about how I look.
Right.
Can men sort of separate the sort of how they see their wives and partners in terms of being sexually attractive, as they used to be, or the sort of 50-year-old woman, 55-year-old?
Well, here's what I see in my practice,
Yeah.
is that that's not how most men feel.
No.
And the programming of you think I should be like I am in my 20s is coming from the woman. Because I never hear men say that, to be honest. That's not what they say, right? They say you're distant, you've changed, you don't come cuddle me anymore. They reflect back to how they're feeling as well.
Correct.
And the biggest enemy of sex for younger people, I'd say under the age of 40, is pornography. And I'm hoping that in the near future, the research on that is going to be very wide in the media, and people will start to understand how destructive that is to sex lives, because pornography is not sex and can often be quite hurtful in people trying to emulate what that really is. But for a lot of women in their, going through menopause, what we see is that they haven't actually correctly communicated what's really going on.
Yeah.
So what they do is they're accusing their husbands of wanting a young 20-year-old, when that's not what the husband's saying. Yeah. The husband's saying something's changed. We don't work together like we used to when we were 20. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier about triggers and crisis and patterning. Yeah. So they're not accusing them of being less attractive to them because they're now in their 40s or 50s or 60s. But often women jump to be defensive because of how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time unpacking the woman's feelings with herself. So if she learns to love who her body is now and how she looks now and what she's capable of sexually, she's going to take that loving package to her partner and teach him to nurture her loving package. If she doesn't like herself, she's going to take her hateful package to her partner, throw it at him, accuse him of hating her because he doesn't half the time not even think like that, and of course we're generalizing because there are men who will say to their wives, you're not what you were in your 20s, but that is as far as I'm concerned, a form of abuse. So you
Yeah.
should actually be looking at why you're tolerating that, what
Yeah.
else is happening in the relationship, and why is the relationship not working?
And actually, you make a good point, because obviously, you know, when women, it's usually from the age of 40, although it can happen, you know, lots of women can go in through early perimenopause symptoms, but as your hormone levels drop from your 40s into menopause, you know, over that 10-year period, with it comes anxiety, lack of energy, motivation, loss of libido. So you know, and then the reason we've actually got a really fantastic blog on our website, actually written by Diane Danzebrink, about how to talk to your partner, because the men, why would man or woman, whoever your partner is, why would they know? You know, they haven't been taught it at school. What is actually physically happening to
Correct.
you? As you say, you know, the good communication is key, because if you I know with my husband, I sat down and said, it's a light bulb moment. I now realize why I've gone doolally for the last 4 years. And when he read it, he just could not believe it. And, you know, was like, well, this is just, you know, makes sense now. So, you know, I think you're so right. It's so much bigger. And of course, it's bigger and broader. You know, this is not about sex. This is how we talk to each other. I mean, I want to, there's a few questions on the Facebook group, but I mean, before we go to the questions, what is the secret to good communication? If you could give us all some take-home messages for people who are watching, what would it be?
I think number one, it would be, don't make assumptions. Number two, it's about having a need to understand. It's letting the person finish what they need to say, not to be judgmental, not give the impression that what they're saying is being judged when it comes to the right or wrong. It's about how they feel. It's being able to feel that whatever you say is about well-intended.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things in which
it's really the benefit of the doubt. And the way you get to benefit of the doubt is if you repeat what your partner just said exactly like they said it, you then add what you want to say. So we advise all our couples, it's called reflective listening. We advise all of them that if somebody says something to you, you repeat it exactly as it was said, which then validates your partner's brain that you've heard them and listened to them. And then you can add your piece and ask them to then repeat exactly what they heard you say and add their piece. And that way of communicating with each other makes both people feel like the other person heard them, listened to them, and has an opinion on top of that, but first they were heard. And then it's not being scared of conflict. You know, we teach our couples the key to happy, successful relationships is the ability to have a great fight.
It's not about blame, and it's not about being right or wrong.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm going to read you a few of the comments, and then I'm going to read the questions. So someone said, Sarah has said, so sad how lack of communication in relationships is so insidious. We're never taught tools how to speak to our partners. Most couples never get to therapy. Silence, suffering, vulnerabilities. And she's put different love languages, which is, really, really interesting. And so I've got a question that's just come in. How best to communicate when one party is extra sensitive and defensive and takes everything personally, which always ends up in an argument? Walks on eggshells daily. She suspects he may also be depressed as he doesn't sleep well. He has no libido, no motivation. They do communicate a bit, but nothing seems to change, and they're both in their early 50s.
So what would be a really good initial intervention is having a need to understand what's going on, asking questions. Because if somebody is feeling vulnerable, if somebody is closed and walking on eggshells, it's really important to be able to validate that person and say, I can step back and I can see that my husband or wife is having an issue with this, right? It's about empathy. It's about sensitivity.
And sadly, Katie, You can't fix that for yourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing that couples need to understand, that you cannot be objective about yourself and your couple's behavior.
And not take it personally. It's about him. It's that person's behavior. It's not about you.
Right. So the place to start with a couple like that is for the woman, if he's the one who's depressed, to actually point out, it seems like he's having a very, very difficult time, and what can she do to help?
Mm-hmm.
And the place to start would be the GP, assess the depression and see what's going on, and then from there get a referral to some kind of therapeutic intervention that can help both of them understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You see, the thing is, Katie, there's two things in life that we're programmed for as human beings. We're programmed for communication and we're programmed for touch. That's in our DNA. But the one thing that we're not programmed for is conversation. Even though we're programmed for communication, to some extent, we are programmed for conversation in terms of what we saw happened at home.
Mm-hmm.
How people were able to deal with conflict and resolve. Talk about things and not resolve them. Talk about things and resolve them. The ability to be validated. The ability to feel that my opinion matters. So you take that package into a relationship, that's your own reality, but it's still about the love language, about what it is that we learned about not communication as we all as human beings are programmed for, how we were programmed to have conversations, and that's the key.
And sadly, our average patient has probably spent hundreds and hundreds of pounds on self-help books, really hundreds of pounds, and stay in the same place, which then makes them really lose hope. Because a self-help book is not going to help you to change the core communication.
Unless you change the core of who you are.
Yeah, you have to understand your patterning to be able to change. And it is really sad because, like, if we could, we would just do couples group all day and get as many people as we possibly could on Zoom and just, talk through couples. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to do that.
Yeah, and it's funny because obviously this is a women's only Facebook group, because obviously people say some very personal things, but we hear so much that a lot of the men, the male partners just don't talk. They see it as a sign of weakness, and they don't have, there are forums like this for men. In fact, we tried to set one up. We did set one up, and what we found was men just didn't want to join because they don't talk quite in the same way, us women,
But this is where being a man can be quite toxic.
Yeah, and I think the statistic was 95% of men are brought to therapy by their partners.
Correct.
I'm talking about heterosexual couples.
Yeah.
The only 5% of men who seek help therapeutically is if there's a severe addiction or personality disorder, or they're going through a very stressful divorce. And other than that, I can just think that most of the guys in our practice come to therapy because their wives pull them in by the ear. So that's also, it just says a lot, but not the younger generation. I have a lot of young guys in their 20s and 30s who call me on their own without partners and are engaging in therapy. So I do have to say that the hope is it is changing.
Can I say to you, can I be a bit anecdotal if you don't mind? Can you indulge me?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Had a guy walk into my office, a patient walk into my office a few years ago. And I said to him, why are you here? What brought you here? He said, my wife said I should come. I said, okay, nice to see you, right? So he said to me, I could ask you a question before I start. Let me ask you a question. I said, sure. He said, are you saying to me that you can sit down to me, we can talk about things, and part of what we do is that you can say, just by talking, we can work issues out? I said, yeah. And I said to him, where'd you learn you couldn't? And he said, oh, right. He shook my hand and he said, can we start again? I said, absolutely. We shook our hands and we started to go. So it's about perception, about the value of being able to talk, just in its basic form.
Well, because sadly, men like 40 and over, and of course I'm generalizing, but it's just what we've seen in 25 years, they don't see a value in going to talk to a stranger about their problems.
Yeah.
So they will, especially a 50-year-old man, you know, they, unless they're getting divorced or something big has happened, like a death or a loss, or, you know, like coronavirus has brought a lot of couples in because of the grief and the loss and the isolation that has happened.
And the phobias.
Yeah, and the phobias. And so that has really, you know, we do have to mention what has happened in the
And
last
intimacy.
year. Yeah, because a lot of couples who locked up with each other 24/7 and have never ever spent that kind of time together went into very serious crisis, and also depending on the size of their homes, it does make the crisis worse, because the more space you have to have an extra room to have a timeout, it improves the ability to be together 24/7. The smaller the home and there's nowhere to hide and nowhere to go but the bathroom, or, you know, it makes it really, really difficult. Yeah. So generally speaking, men 40 and over, you know, have a really, really hard time with the concept of therapeutic intervention, and that going to therapy as a couple can actually make a difference and change things. So sometimes in the beginning, we spend a few sessions kind of unpacking their resistance. And the woman takes it personally that he doesn't love me enough or care enough about me to be in therapy. But we understand it's not that. It's that it's foreign, it's uncomfortable, and then trying to talk about sex.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but one of the questions here, whilst we're on the topic, it's the last question, and then I'll wrap up, is my husband thinks that sex is only sex if it's penetrative. I've told him a million times it's so painful and I don't want it, and there are other ways of us being intimate, but he won't accept it. What can I say to him? And again, I guess, you know, you've kind of said it. It's actually, again, about how they communicate, isn't it? It's
right. And you see, maybe he feels from his subconscious, because we all focus on subconscious and conscious, we all function on two levels. And maybe for him, he feels that if he's not penetrating his wife, that he's a failure. So, you know, what she's not understanding is that he can't hear that he's going to fail in having sex. So that's where, like, even just a couple of sessions with a therapist can definitely make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
But I think it's also important that a man understands that usually a woman doesn't orgasm by penetrative sex.
Correct. You see, so it goes into so many other topics. Absolutely. But if he's struggling to understand that penetrative sex is painful for her, what she wants to do is start the conversation differently. What does non-penetrative sex mean to you, husband? Like, how do you feel about the fact that we would have sex where we're not having penetrative sex? Because that's where the conversation has to start, which is the upside down of that. Mm-hmm. And what can I do to help you feel more comfortable about possibly having a different type of sex until I feel better or my body's healed differently? So it's about turning it upside down as well, and not just taking it personally that he doesn't understand and he's not hearing me, and then it's the anger and the separation.
But it's also about how to balance what's primal in a man versus what's good for the couple.
Yeah,
absolutely. Look, we could talk all night to you guys, and we haven't even scratched the surface. I just, you know, we're running out of time, but I just wanted to thank you both so much for coming in, and thanking everyone. You know, thanks everyone so much for watching. I hope you all found it helpful. It is recorded. We will embed it in our blog and share it on YouTube and on our website. And again, I just want to thank our sponsor, Silk. You can get a free sample on their website and 30% off all their products throughout February. It's www.silk.co.uk. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And if you did have any questions that you didn't have time or you didn't see when we were live that you want me to forward to Caron and Glenn, I'm happy to do that. It'll be a very generalized reply. Obviously they can't give you detailed advice unless you are one of their clients, but email me, katie@lattelounge.co.uk. And meanwhile, join us next week, same time, for the last in our series with pelvic floor physio and comedian Elaine Miller, aka the Gusset Gripper. We're going to be talking all about the do's and don'ts, the ins and outs of pelvic floor health. And if you missed the first 2 events, you can find them on our YouTube channel. So thanks again, guys. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Well, bye.
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 Bye.